Announcing the exhibition at X12 early in 1970 was an unconventional press release which read more like a manifesto than an advertisement. Starting with a list that explained the title of the exhibition, it read, "We are 12 women artists who come together to show. Our logo is X12. X is the unknown quantity in an equation yet to be resolved. X is exploration. X is crossed out, disposed of, as we have been for so many centuries. X marks the spot. This is where it is at." Following this list of definitions came a statement that marked it out as an event with high ambitions. We are on the threshold of the unknown quantity in us, of the equation yet to be discovered, like Einstein's E equals mc squared that split the atom and changed everything. Written by the artist Sylviana Goldsmith, the text offers a glimpse into the ways in which this group exhibition represented something revolutionary to those involved. Not only a chance to show their work, it was also put forward as the start of a new movement, as an act as groundbreaking as Einstein's theory of relativity and with similar potential to change the world. In this paper, it is exactly this sense of the exhibition's radical potential that I'm interested in investigating. As the AWARE project richly illuminates and has done in the last study days, which looked really fascinating, this was by no means the first time that women artists had come together to show their work, reflecting the ways in which women were often unaware of similar projects and events, either nationally or globally. The well-trodden critical terrain of the failures to teach and promote women's practice, even where it exists, provides context. Women working to self-organise exhibitions were often doing so in ignorance of precedents and contemporaries, particularly in the early 1970s, where feminist publications and art history programmes were yet to be established. For those involved, it was revolutionary. X12 offered more than just the opportunity to exhibit, but moreover, the chance to transform what they saw as the patriarchal and exclusive American art world. In foregrounding the importance of this ambition and its ties to activism, I want to draw a distinction between exhibitions and salons of women's art and feminist exhibitions. Though clearly related and arguably always political, promoting women's art does not necessitate an ideological programme or an attempt to take a structurally different approach, bar replacing male artists for women. A feminist exhibition implies a significant reimagining of how exhibitions are organised and what they aim to achieve, challenging base assumptions such as quality and seeking different results such as the rejection of individual art stars and success judged in market terms. Focusing on the relationship between exhibition and the activism that informed it, I will argue that in order to understand these explicitly feminist exhibitions in the early 1970s, it is necessary to put them in the context of the activism that informs and facilitates them. Examining the political intentions of X12 and its background in the activism of the group Women Artists in Revolution, I'm going to establish the core debates, particularly around the identity of the woman artist, and situate it in relation to broader feminist politics of the time. The exhibition itself opened on January 27, 1970 and ran until February 12 at Museum, a Project of Living Artists, a space that had been an important venue for art politics, acting as a site for meetings of the anti-Vietnam War and artists' rights activism of the Art Workers Coalition. Organised by Venita Nemec and Caroline Mazzello, and featuring their work alongside an additional 10 women artists, Louise de Kosler, Iris Crump, Marianne Gillies, Helene Gross, Dolores Holmes, Inverna, Aline Lederman, Doris O'Kane, Sylviana and Alida Walsh, it showed work of various styles, sought not only for aesthetic coherence, sought not for any aesthetic coherence, but instead, in Nemec's words, sex was the only criterion for inclusion. There is little documentation left of the exhibition, and at this early stage in my research, I've located only a few of the specific works that were included in the show. Critical responses offer a sense of what X12 looked like as a whole. Lawrence Alloway described it in the following terms: characteristic works of big, cut-out caricatures, assemblages of environmental medievalism, or of claustrophobic cabinet scale and bloodied bits of store mannequins in a heap on the floor. The lack of documentation on the show is perhaps unsurprising, given that this was a short-run exhibition organised by largely unestablished women artists whose work has not received significant attention since. However, from published accounts and subsequent memoirs, it is possible to gather some sense of the work included. So, interdisciplinary artist Alida Walsh contributed Toilet Mirror Environment, which was installed, as far as I can gather, in the bathroom, and which we can see some of in this clipping. Although a particularly poor quality image, we can get a sense of its approach. There are hands that frame the mirror and reach out of its bounds. A female figure whose appearance looks distressed, both in depiction and rendering, looks down away from the implicit gaze of the viewer who would be reflected next to her. The feminist themes of the pressures on women to be beautiful, of looking and being looked at, are apparent. Mary Ann Gillies contributed abstract geometric painting and sculpture, as can be seen just about in this image. We can also get a sense of the kind of work contributed by others in its description and by looking at works made by the artists around the same time. Louise de Kosler included 3 abstract paintings, Aquarius, Yellow Jack and Apollo, part of her series Aquarius Combine Paintings, which in Cindy Nems's terms were fields of colour studded with insets of brilliantly pigmented plexiglass. Although I've not been able to locate the exact works, her approach in For the Dutch Masters, made in '64, gives a sense of the kind of field of colour she was working with, reflecting her New York school-style canvases being made throughout the decade. In Werner created abstract sculptural objects which suggested bodies, such as this untitled work from 1970. Its curving form suggests women bodies, with its rounded lines and hollows resembling fertility symbols. However, its surfaces are smooth, it looks sketched and graffiti-like. Nemec created fabric sculptures described by Lil Pickard as doll puppets, hanging from the ceiling in grotesque pillow shapes covered with fine line drawings. Although probably not this, as the description offered by Pickard doesn't quite match up, and this seems to have been made later, still Nemec's goddess crayon offers a sense of the kind of aesthetic she was working with. It is an abject representation of femininity on a phallic form, with pointed breasts and strings of blonde hair that fall in graciously from its head. It is posed as if offering blessings whilst being strung from above. Some for which images of the work are absent are elucidated in description. Dolores Holmes's medieval environment is described by the artist as a work that uses the medieval world as a model to modify and explore attitudes and feelings towards the modern urban world. Nemza offers us some sense of Crump's work too, which she claims presents a broad, gentle view of human beings engaged in communal activities. She incorporates lights and mirrors into her contemporary settings, Nemza tells us. X12 was one of the first actions to emerge from conversations being had amongst the activist group Women Artists in Revolution. This collective have formed as a splinter group of the AWC, which, despite including a demand for equity for women in their programme, had failed to take seriously the exclusion of women artists from the mainstream art world, much less from their own activism. Seeking to bring the lessons of the women's liberation movement to bear on the art world, a group of women artists joined together, in part out of a need for support, and in part to make take the male-dominated art institutions to task. As Miro Castaner states in 1973, out of isolation we come together to communicate. From its very beginnings, war was based on a model of mutual support developed through consciousness-raising type activities that allowed women artists to recognise and understand their own exclusion and the effect it had on their careers and personal lives. Meetings were held in which the experience of being a woman artist was investigated. In a declaration issued at an early moment in its formation, which also acted as a flyer seeking members, Juliet Gordon writes, "Unfetter the female genius, and who knows where this will lead. Without present conflicts and barriers, she can be strongly committed to her chosen art and still be very much a woman. What will the fibre of our life be like then?" Underlining this is a row of question marks that create a break in the text. Beneath it is a paragraph that reads, "If you are interested in these and other questions related to women artists, you may be interested enough to attend our meetings. We are doing research and actions and trying to change ourselves as well as to affect present society." Foregrounding questions in both the presentation of the flyer and as a core activity, even the name of the group in January 1970 is something eligible for debate, described as it is as Women Artists and Rebellion, Revolution, ? Castanis explains the significance of women coming together to investigate their own experience. When women come together, she tells us, as they did in war, to communicate, a piece of the wall is broken down. More and more of that wall has been chipped away as more and more women meet to talk. As women continue to grow, they are learning to free themselves of old patterns, which are as antiquated as the male patterns from which they were derived. The movement's goal is to make significant change, both inside people's heads as well as outside the world. In this description, the connection to the tactics of the wider women's movement is made apparent. Consciousness raising had emerged with the women's liberation movement and radical feminism from about 1967, and at the time that X12 was mounted, it offered the opportunity to form a community of women through understanding the specificity of their experience in order to work together for change. As Carol Hanisch argued in her important 1970 text, The Person Was Political, one of the first things we discover in these groups is that personal problems are political problems. Hanisch also establishes the ways in which this tactic acts politically rather than as a way to deal with individual problems. There are no personal solutions at this time, she states. There is only collective action for a collective solution. Consciousness raising proved crucial to forging solidarity between artists. The feminist understanding of the self-declared woman artist emerged from within its practice, meaning that being a woman artist meant not only being a woman who was practicing as an artist, but that the artist was working as part of a shared political project, that they recognised their own oppression under the existing system, and that they were part of a broader activist movement that sought to change it, their differences elided through their collective experience as women. This is seen most clearly in the 1973 Rip-Off file, organised by the Ad Hoc Committee of Women Artists, another activist group which had emerged in the wake of war. The document is described by its editors as a dossier of reports of sexism, rip-offs, put-downs, discrimination in art world and art schools. Separated into sections that discuss jobs, students and art world, it documents 41 personal accounts of discrimination suffered by women artists, curators and critics in a male-dominated art world. Describing acts of sexism, both blatant and insidious, the Rip-Off file presents a range of accounts of the ways in which misogyny operates. Included are stories of women students refused critique by their art school teachers or instructors on the basis that they were destined to become homemakers and art school teachers. School art teachers. Resistance to hiring women on the basis that they were women, of artists refused representation because they were too good-looking, and of gallerists using professional studio visits to pursue unwanted relationships with women artists. The introduction to the document outlines the motives for compiling these accounts together. We hope to openly show how widespread are sexist attitudes and behaviour so that women would discover that the humiliations they'd endured were not unique or personal. The stories of denigration, rejection and sexual harassment are often so similar that a picture builds of the structures of sexism. By sharing the pain of these rejections and humiliations, of the judgments on individuals based on their physical experience, of professional slights and the sense that there should be a limit to the amount of women teaching or showing art, a sense of solidarity emerges. This is the explicit intention of the publication. The accounts are presented according to the same format, name, location, account, presented in sans serif font and columns. The selection of text has been restricted to specific indictments and particular incidents, with more general and philosophical statements not included due to the cost of printing, creating a consistent tone throughout accounts in which events are recounted and feelings described. This editorial decision is not only expedient, it also contributes to the political message of the pamphlet. The multiple contributors are presented as a group, their hurt made identical through the presentation of the material. In resembling a newspaper, the Rip-Off file assumes the visual language of objective account. Reporting on the emotional truth of patriarchy and its effect on women, the publication provides evidence of upset, humiliation and hurt as collective experience and produces a portrait of a community similarly affected. In X12, although there is no unifying feminist theme to the work included, still the act of making this an explicitly women-only exhibition, organised by the artists themselves rather than by a curator, as well as the inclusion of material that explored feminist themes, led to critics reporting on its political radicalism. Alloway described it as having an overwhelming effect of fervour, which he ascribed to being not for art, but for the social and instrumental uses to which it can be put. Emily Ganauer's response in the New York Post was significantly less charitable, offering little sense of the work itself. Instead, her review is an account of the artists focused on their activist intentions, dismissively relating their belligerent anger in an exchange between the group and herself, an older woman sculptor and an established woman artist, who are all unnamed. She recounts what she describes as the silly argument, accusing the militant young feminists, in her terms, of being involved in a class war, a political battle in which we're all supposed to serve as nameless soldiers in the ranks. And those are her words. Although the tone of this dismissal is unenlightening, and it bears noting that Genoa rolls back on this in later text, it does point to the ways in which this show proposed something radically different. This is visible in the promotional materials for X12. On the poster, the exhibition is named and the artists identified by surname only, with the exception of Silviana, who was working under her first name at the time. This is a familiar strategy from women's exhibition history, where gendering first names are omitted in order to avoid being identified as women. However, 2 lines down this is reversed. Written in capital letters is the statement 12 artists, women. Both artists and women are given equal importance. The identity of the woman artist is put forward plainly to the potential audience. This is reflected in the imagery included on the page, alongside the various renderings of X, which you can just about make out, I hope. Itself, of course, understood as a metonymy for chromosomal femaleness, is a series of photographs of the women involved. Taken on a roof in the East Village, the women artists are shown talking to one another, relaxing in each other's company, enjoying the sunshine whilst wrapped up against New York's winter. A sense of solidarity and community emerges. Women artists are declared not as something threatening and belligerent in Genoa's terms, but as a community of women working together towards the future, no one more important than the others. It was in their collective decisions to show as women that potential was unleashed, one that could change everything. This is furthered in the press release, in which Goldsmith asserts the value of the traditionally denigrated female identity, which women had been encouraged not to show in their art until that point. We do not deny our true femininity, whatever it may be. We affirm all vital values: health, beauty, creativity, courage, sensitivity, strength, feeling, energy. Between the fully liberated man and woman, we see no difference but biology. It is interesting that part of the potential of the work is to facilitate a model of the artist who is not restricted by formal concerns, but that is allowed to be emotional, something posited as crucial to both political enlightenment and creativity. In his review of the exhibition, Robert Levin cites an unnamed participating artist who declares, "In the future it will only be women who are healthy enough to make art, because men are so emotionally and socially corrupt. Women have been allowed to cry. That's why we're healthier. The civilized white man is dead. All his education only gets him ready for the grave." Supporting this thesis, another artist goes further, saying, "Women have more intrinsic personal humanity than men do." In this way, it is clear that there is little attempt made by those involved in the exhibition to fit within the expected dominant criteria for art world success. Instead, women artists sought to remake the terms for aesthetic practice, rejecting prescriptive formalism that is positioned as seemingly literally poisonous, and instead championing an authentic emotional approach to art making. Therefore, in the feminist exhibition, women working together acts as a rejection of the art world itself. More than seeking the inclusion of a few more women at the table, instead this is an entirely different approach. Unlike previous exhibitions of all women's work or one-woman shows that had happened in America in the previous decade, such as Women Artists of America 1707 to 64, organised by William H. Gertz at the Newark Museum in 1965, collective action which acknowledges the oppression suffered by women and acts to support their ambitions is seen as breaking the conditions that allow the exclusion to continue in the art world. As Silviana writes, "The old game is dead, we begin again." With the activism of war, the definitions of women artists and the potential for women's creative practice changed. Consciousness raising revealed to many women artists that they did not want to succeed on the masculinized art world's terms, and instead they wanted to create something new, open and humanized. In X12, the terms of the feminist exhibition are established, something that creates possibilities for participants and audiences, and that is based not on the traditionally exclusive terms of judgment and quality, but instead on the importance of hearing the artist's voice and bringing them into the conversation. This was something inherently tied to and facilitated by the ambitions of feminist arts activism. As Muriel Castanes says, "The most important thing war's beginnings teach us is what I would call the feminist phenomenon. That is, that a relatively small and powerless group of women working closely together and armed only with an unshakable premise can cause a revolution."
Would there be any question for Rachel?
That was really interesting. Can you say a little bit more? You ended with by evoking the phrase consciousness raising, which to to me, crystallizes something I wanted to ask you about, which is how the relationship between the individual and collectivity was understood. Because it sounds like that going forward, one of the briefs of exhibitions like this was the establishment of collectivity and consciousness raising through collectivity. But these are art exhibitions, after all, and they're objects that in some way connect to or are meant to represent individuals. So can you work through that a little bit for us?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's something that this project is actually looking, which I'm just starting, is actually looking to explore in more detail, because I think what's been spoken about so far with things like Women Artists Revolution, Ad Hoc Committee of Women Artists and other things, is as though they were like an entity in themselves that made decisions rather than a group of people. I think that collectivity is something everyone really wants until it becomes something that they have to deal with the kind of ins and outs of. People are quite reasonably protective of their own careers, and for some, any conversation about this reduces those different ambitions. There are some people who are showing because they're women artists who want to be shown and want to succeed on the art world's terms as they already exist. There are some women who want to see the end to patriarchy itself and think art is the way to do that. There are other women who think this is a useful way of working together. So I don't want to erase those differences. I think practically collectivity and collaboration are fraught, as anyone who's worked in any groups knows. And I think that is mirrored in this. But there is a genuine sense that the focus on the individual has been used against women, particularly because your problems are then seen as individual problems and you're sort of told to sort them out. And that comes through in the New Left particularly, who are much more interested in other people's problems than particularly women's problems or people of colour as well. Those problems less welcome than much greater structural ones. So I think, they are in conflict. I don't want to sort of falsely resolve them. People want to succeed, and what success means is different to different people. And a lot of the time, these are short-lived projects that collapse quite quickly because of the pressures of competing ambitions and sort of different levels of commitment to the underlying cause. But and I think representing yourself, there is something about representing your own story that is seen as sort of contributing to a broader conversation. And I think that is perhaps where I'm at with it at the moment. Thanks.
Another question?
I'm curious about these artists, participants of X12. I don't know many of them. Did you do research on them? What did they become? What did they do afterwards?
Right, I mean, I'm at the beginning of this research, so I'm curious too. A lot of them are people who, the reason I couldn't show more examples of their work is I literally couldn't find anything on them, and I'm hoping that's something that I can rectify through kind of archival research. Some of them are still practicing artists. Sylviana Goldsmith, you can buy her work on the Saatchi website. So for about $300, kind of depressingly. But anyway, she's still a working artist. Muriel Castanis, too, is someone who's still at work. Nemec's website kind of records her own trajectory. So there's sort of little hints of people. Nobody is sort of living the life of Riley on their artwork, as far as I can tell. Some people aren't working at all anymore, and I think only probably worked for a couple of years. So, and that's again something that I think is really interesting and that we should look into, is what do we do with those people who practiced for 2 years and then couldn't make it work and decided to go and do something else. And so I want to try and recover some of that in looking at these exhibitions. I think they're a really good way to get to find those people.
I just have a comment, and that is at the New York Studio School in the next month or two, there is a show that's called X Marks the Spot, and they're women artists who went to the school. This is a school that was founded by members of the New York School. It was the first Whitney Museum, etc. And so I don't know that they're aware of this show that you're speaking of, but it would be quite interesting to put you in touch with the people who are curating that show, that you should at least send in your information, that they should know, that the curators who are writing about this would know about the historics of the name of the show, and the signification, obviously, of the X. I mean, you didn't read that, but I'm thinking of, the X over being, the Heidegger, the Derrida, all of this X, and what it means seems important.
Sure, and I think it's used in that way, and like it is, as you say, something that comes up again and again in exhibitions of women's work because of that way. It's sort of negation, but also kind of related to sort of chromosomes and how you identify women, and so that women sort of narrowly conceived. But so I think it's something that has a lot of potential. But that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I would like to. Brilliant.
Curating that show. They should have at least what you showed us first.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
And did they do any other exhibition, or was it the only one that you could find?
No, there are a number of exhibitions that happen around this time. The next one happens quite shortly afterwards, which is Modern Art, spelled MODD, and art. So
by what?
It's Members of War, and this one again is Members of War. So Juliette Gordon, who is one of the founders of War, kind of disavows this as their exhibition at the early stages, but then they historicise it as part of their own kind of canon. So I think, that sense that this is quite a scrappy history. It's not something that people are... It's sort of people doing things and then going, actually, that was really important, and then changing the story on it, I think. So, there were a series of them, and people saw the potential of exhibiting as feminists, as a really... and increasingly as feminists rather than women kind of coming to show together. There's kind of a nervousness about sort of making that claim that then suddenly the sort of trajectory, or the power behind whatever that word is, comes together, and people feel like, actually, no, this is a really important thing, and we're going to change everything. And their language becomes much more... we're going to destroy everything is going to come down, we're going to wreck it and smash it, and much more exciting than the kind of early
That's
nervous
maybe
things.
why they did not pursue, because they had such high ambition.
And,
they're being crushed.
Ambition is the enemy of success, right? It's that sense of, Lauren Ballant's thing about cruel optimism, where every time you try something and then it crushes you because it doesn't work, it sort of makes you go, no point. So I think there's some of that, but also people have lives, and they have children, and they have jobs, and they're... the sort of urgency of it kind of disappears. So I think there's also those things at work here as well.
Well, we look forward to more information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.